man, we're really beating our heads against the wall here. Like, what are we accomplishing here? And so
Yeah.
then you had some kids who are, they're writing like three sentences and it's like, okay, I'm done, and it doesn't make it, and they're just like bombing the thing. It's just a total
Hmm.
waste of time for them. And teachers were venting about it, like, oh my gosh, it's stressing out these kids, and what are we doing here? That's the big kind of challenge in education right now, just in public education, is the big buzzword is like differentiation. They want you to, um, it's like they're dancing around the whole idea of Montessori.
The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture.
"Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them." So the person speaking in those opening clips was Andrew. No last name because, as you'll see further in the discussion coming up, it is somewhat understandable that he does not want to share his last name. So Andrew has been an elementary school teacher for the past 10 years, but he has recently started to question if what he and his public school colleagues are doing is actually helping students or holding them back. With his own two young children, and that's a toddler and a 5-year-old now in Montessori school, and they're showing incredible growth in it, Andrew believes he just might have found a successful alternative to America's traditional system, which, ironically, he is still a part of. So just a huge thanks to this man for coming on. I mean, really putting himself out there. So let's get to it. Andrew, thank you for coming on. I know it's not the normal guest where we're, saying full names and all of it. I thought we just hop in, again, as we've talked about, I was a relatively traditional or conventional school teacher for years. And I really loved a lot of what I did, but there began to be times when I knew something was wrong. So have you had moments like that where you started to kind of go, oh, this doesn't seem right, in your teaching profession?
Um,
Experience.
yeah, I don't know. There are certainly days where you're kind of, you feel like, man, we're really beating our heads against the wall here. Like, what are we accomplishing here? But that might just be, you kind of attribute that to other things. Oh, that's just how it is. That's how teaching is. But I don't know. I'm trying to think of something specific. I remember early on in my career that I noticed that kids who were kind of behavior problems were also, not always, but also typically kids who were not the best at, with their grades, not getting good grades.
Mm,
And I always just thought, well, it's because they're acting up in class. But I remember this conversation having with a parent pretty early on in my career, maybe my second or third year teaching, where the parent was saying that, oh yeah, so and so was always we never had complaints from teachers about behavior, until the previous year in third grade with when his math grade started slipping. And math, I guess it was like multiplication or whatever they were learning that year, and then he started acting up, and that kind of like set off a light bulb in my head. I remember that as being like a big learning lesson for me, where it was like, oh, he's not measuring up to his peers. He suddenly felt like he's inadequate or something like that, and so he's deciding to, I guess, deflect attention away from this by acting up or something. It just becomes this vicious cycle of like,
yeah.
okay, now I'm not gonna pay attention. I'm gonna be a class clown, and therefore then I'm not gonna learn as much, and then kind of spirals that way. And to me, that was kind of like, well, it made it seem like, well, either a teacher or like the school in general caused that. That wasn't just because the kid
Yeah.
was a bad kid. Like that was the fault of either inadequate teaching of whatever that math thing was that he was struggling with, or just the now I kind of realize, it's just the fact that maybe we're just grading kids uh, all at the same time, at the same age, on the same skill, and then they're comparing themselves to each
Yeah.
other.
Man, hearing you talk, I feel like this is going to be like a confessional episode, at least for me,
Yeah.
because I'm like, oh, I have these memories of just, you'd have, just like you're saying, I think you only have children that are acting up or the class clown, usually almost always when they're not doing well in a
Hmm.
particular class or they are beyond advanced. And then those
Yeah,
are the
that
two
can
that
happen.
usually act up. But I remember just thinking, oh, well, the way we deal with this is that we really work with the child to understand that it's okay not to get an A on an exam. It's okay not to get a B. you don't have to act up. So now all of a sudden you're the seeming psychologist to this child, as if the problem is that he's got low self-esteem, when it's our environment that's aiding him to get
it's
this low
it's it's
self-esteem.
causing the low self-esteem.
Yeah. So
Sure. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
just like, but anyhow, so yeah, that rings true with me, particularly because you said the beating the head against the wall. You started to think, oh, that's just the nature of the work,
Right.
right?
That's just how
That
school
this,
is. Yeah.
yeah, that's the reality. So I just kind of want to get across to people that are in Montessori and never experienced conventional school or traditional school.
Oh,
You're like, they look at like, how could you ever do that? And it's like, you don't understand the mindset that we're in when you don't know Montessori. You don't know an alternative.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, especially if you grow up as a student in a traditional public school or something
Yeah.
like that, and that's just how it is. You sit there, you listen to the lessons, you take the tests, and you
Yeah, you do
and
you do the work.
you do the work, and that's it. It's just something that you've, like, since a little kid, you've been acculturated that way. So
Yeah, I was just talking with the head of school. I got to get him on the podcast too. Like, he's head of school of a very, very high end private school in Orange County, California. But anyways, he had said, we got to get these kids to stop playing the game. And I think it's what you're talking about is we're playing the game because that's what we played as kids, and now we're
mm,
doing it as teachers.
yeah.
But so I guess the question's related then. Do you blame any of the teachers? I mean, you're one of them right now. I was one of them. And then you have colleagues. Do you see this as a kind of a teacher and system problem, or just a system problem, or how do you view that?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, are there problematic teachers? Sure. In my experience, though, I think it's more rare than a lot of people think. Like, you'll find maybe some veteran teachers who are real burned out, who just don't care anymore. That can
Mhm.
happen. But there are also plenty of veteran teachers who are still, like, putting in, tons of hours, working their butts off.
Mhm.
There's teachers who I don't know, I'm stereotyping here, but there might be some teacher who comes out of college, just wants to do cute things and is not really thinking about,
Don't
like,
be a
how do I
jerk,
design.
Andrew.
You see it though. It's
I
like, oh,
know
I
what
want to make
we
my
know.
classroom look cute, but
Yeah,
not
yeah.
really thinking through, like, how do I design an effective lesson. It's more like, oh, I
Yeah.
want to make this activity real fun and cute.
Yeah.
But and of course, you hear about on the news, there's extremely bad people in education. Obviously, we want them out of there. But
Mhm.
I mean, just I don't know. I don't know the data on this, but anecdotally, at least the people that I meet, I think 90+% of teachers are, they're smart, they're trying hard, they're adapting with whatever is asked of them, and things like that. So, but I think the answer, I guess, to your question is probably pretty obviously it's the system, because the teachers are a product of the system. Like I
Yeah.
said, like we were talking about before, they've experienced that as a student, as in their teacher training in college, in their in the whole process, and continued professional development as teachers. They're just
Yeah.
trying to, like, work within that constraint as best they can, and it's I think it's a lot of Montessori people say, why can't you just think outside the box? I think, like you said, when you're in it, it's not natural for most people to think outside of the box and think, like, wait, what if this whole thing is messed up? What if we
Yeah.
could just
Yeah.
approach this from a different. It's more just like, um well, how can I, work within this to make it. And you have some teachers who are, I think, really good teachers, given those constraints, given those rules of, like, okay, well, you have to teach this many minutes of math and this
Yeah.
many minutes of reading, and they're doing a good job within that. But I think that's mostly the problem, is that, you're
What
never
can you
gonna
do?
you're right. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things I want to jump off of with what you're getting into, but you've seen the Truman Show? Uh,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, say sure. I wonder how many people in the audience have seen it, but generally, the idea is you're trapped, as you were saying, you're kind of trapped in your own world. And it kind of now
Yes.
makes me think of just like like the Earth-centered universe. You just, when you think the Earth is the center of the universe and that's all you've been taught, that's all you've seen. I mean, not only your lifetime, but hundreds of years before you, it's hard to imagine something different. And I think because Montessorians, as you said, they're like, well, can't you see how ridiculous this is? And it's kind of like, no, when you're in it, it's very hard actually to see how ridiculous it is. But I wonder how much with you, it's like, have you experienced, you said you kind of beating your head against the wall. I know in your classroom, you're teaching all fourth graders. So all fourth graders have to be at the same level at every single subject, whether it's math, literature, science, history, whatever you happen to be teaching. How do you, as a teacher, and have you seen your other teachers handle that predicament? Because to me, it's an impossibility. You can't, hit every level in every single subject. How have you attacked that problem? I know Montessori, we have mixed ages, so we don't really deal with this type of issue. But you got to deal with it as a conventional traditional school teacher. You got 30 kids, they're all the same age, but they're of completely different levels or
different levels.
vastly
Yeah,
different
exactly.
levels. How do you deal with it?
Well, that's the big kind of challenge in education right now, just in public education. Is the big buzzword is like differentiation. They want you to it's like they're dancing around the whole idea of Montessori. It's like if an administrator walked into my classroom, they would want to see, ideally, a really good teacher would be maybe at the back table or something, teaching a small group. You have them split up by levels, whatever it is. Let's say it's math, right? And you're teaching a small group on their level, or reading's probably even a better example, because the reading levels can be very different. You're doing whatever reading lesson you're doing with them. The other kids are then, doing independent activities around the classroom. It kind of sounds a little bit like Montessori in that way. And they're doing independent activities that are more on their level. And then you kind of rotate, okay, next group up, and you're doing that. And ideally also those activities that they're doing would be their choice, of a whole menu of different things that you could have for them. I've as a younger teacher, not that I'm old or anything, but as a younger teacher before I had kids and everything like that, when I was really staying, like, working,
had a lot of time.
Yes, I was burning the midnight oil there at school.
Yeah.
You'd have to come up with all these little activities on your own, and that's really what I think you don't get quite. That's what they want, but you don't quite get that support of all those different activities to present to the kids. So you get a very inconsistent, like, maybe their second grade teacher doesn't really do that. They still just teach the whole class, everything, just kind of because that's what they've been doing for 30 years.
Yeah.
And then the next year the teacher tries to do it and it's okay. And then you might have a really good teacher who is able to pull it off. And so it's not a consistent environment. Like, the thing I like about Montessori is that same teacher for, at least whatever, like 3 years or something like that. And the kids have experienced this type of thing since they're 3 or even younger. So they're just used to it, whereas these kids are not necessarily used to that.
I gotta tell you, it's frightening listening to you, because it's like, and I have to imagine there are so many other teachers just like you, because it's so similar to my experience. Like, just as an example you give, it's like, you're young when you started out, just like myself, just like most teachers, exactly, early 20s. And you're just, you got all the time in the world. You got all the energy, you got all the passion in the world. So yeah, you're making this work to the extent it can work by staying up. Like, you're literally up at 6 to bed at 11 midnight, and you're trying to force this to work. And then of course there, again, as you said, then there's some experienced teacher down the hall is like, yeah, I've been there, done that. I'm doing, my way.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm sure you've seen this too. Like, a child might love, because I was doing history, might love history one year because they have a great teacher. And then the next year, the parent's like, my child hates history. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, maybe you didn't have a teacher who was staying up, 20 hours a day teaching. So, and I think that's probably where that idea of, when you look back at traditional school, maybe you have this, but I do, like, there's a teacher that I really loved. And I think it's because you find those star teachers, but the problem is you're attached to the teacher, not necessarily the learning per se.
Sure.
Usually. So it's kind of nuts hearing you talk about how you handle that. How do you do those small group lessons, or how do you handle these different types of children?
Yeah.
Because it's basically, you're forcing it by pure willpower of your own.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I was just having this conversation with some coworkers the other day at, I guess it was lunch, about, we had this kind of standard, our district wanted them to do this standardized, like, writing assignment, which kind of mimics the standardized test at the end of the year that the state gives. And it's like, you have to read several articles, answer some questions, then and synthesize all that information and type a little essay about it, and answer whatever question they ask. and you had some kids who were, doing well, and then and it's like timed also, and you had some,
Yeah.
talk about stress, right? And so
Yeah.
then you had some kids who are, they're writing like 3 sentences, and it's like, okay, I'm done, and it doesn't make it, and they're just like bombing the thing. It's just a total
Hmm.
waste of time for them. And teachers were venting about it, like, oh my gosh, it's stressing out these kids, and what are we doing here? And I brought up the point. I said, isn't it funny that they want us to teach all the kids at their level, differentiate and teach them all
Hmm.
at their level. And then they're going to throw a high stress test at them that's all the same. It's the same exact
Yeah.
test, every single kid at the same exact time based on their age. And I was like, how is
It's a
that fair?
contradiction, right?
Right. It's a huge contradiction. And, they were like, oh, yeah, you're right. But then it's just that
And then you
right
just
back
keep
to
going at it. Yeah,
right.
you keep
Like, well, that's
hammering
what they
at
want
it.
us to do. So, yeah, that's what we're
Yeah.
going to do.
And I don't know. I mean, it's like you almost want like a unified rebellion against it, but I think it's hard because you're rebelling from inside the box in a way, and you don't quite know what to replace it with, you
Bro,
know?
well, I don't think a lot of, I don't know. Yeah, you tell me if your experience is different, but I don't think a lot of um, public school teachers even know like that there is another option. Like
Yeah.
Montessori is like, they'll ask, oh, where do your kids go to school? I say, oh, such and such Montessori Academy, and oh, what, I think I've heard of, what is that Montessori? I've heard of that. What is that?
Yeah.
Some sort of fancy preschool? Yeah, I would. The other day, my kid's school has this app where they send like pictures of the kids doing work throughout the day, so you can see what they're doing. And I was just showing one of my coworkers, my 2-year-old, and just to be like, hey, look how cute my kid is, basically just showing a
Hmm.
picture on my phone. And she's looking at it, she said, oh, so cute. And then she immediately said, well, what is he doing there? He was working with, I don't know if I have the right name, but it's a zipper, like on a it's like a zipper frame, maybe, like
Yeah, the
kind of like that.
dressing
Yeah,
frames. Yeah.
dressing frame. Okay, so he was
Yep.
doing a zipper. I was like, oh, it looks like he's practicing to use a zipper. And I'm not, I kid you not, she said,
Mm.
wow, that's really practical. I thought, well, yeah, that's practical
And
life,
that's a
right?
practical life activity. Yeah, but
but then she immediately starts asking about, like, wow, looking at the background, that looks like a house. Like, what's the deal with all these
yeah.
shelves and everything? And so then I start going into like, and I said, well, that's kind of the Montessori thing. They have all these works on the shelves, and they go and get and she's like, well, what is the Montessori? What is that? And
Yeah.
so I always struggle with like, how do I give an elevator pitch that's not doesn't sound like I'm condescending or something like that?
Yeah.
So
That's the
um,
story of my life right now,
I
teaching this
imagine.
this Montessori, because you don't want to I don't want to be offensive towards, like, I mean, I was one of those teachers. I was in your position. So it's not like I want to bash somebody, but I also do want
Right.
to wake people up to, like, if you're a parent out there and you're sending your kids to these schools, just because it's close to your house and it's rated A on great schools or whatever the heck they're doing the ratings, it means nothing. Like,
Mm,
that means nothing. Those ratings basically tell you, okay, your kid went to this university. It doesn't tell you if after he graduated from this top university, if he got depressed,
right.
suicidal. It doesn't tell
Right.
you if, he's making $300,000 a year, but is miserable.
Right.
It doesn't tell you that if the kid dropped out of high school and just went straight into some work that he loved, fixing cars, and now he's a millionaire, didn't even go to high school. So it's such a, like, the whole system is in a very crappy state right now. So it's sad. But what I like what you just said, and what I see when I talk to, because sometimes I'll do a what is Montessori to like a group of traditional school teachers. They don't even know what they're
Mm.
getting. And they are really curious because we want answers as traditional school
Well,
teachers. Want
yeah.
how do I do this? How do I work?
Right, because I'm describing it as like, oh yeah, and she's kind of, I can see she's kind of come around, and she's like, wow, that's kind of like, that's pretty good, like she's
Yeah.
immediately like realizing, like, wow, that's just, I had the same experience as I'm researching more about Montessori. I'm like, oh, this is smart, this is a good idea, I should be doing
Yeah.
more stuff like this.
Yeah. And I
I
think it's a natural thing, right? If you're trying to figure out ways to make this work and you really care about children, then all of a sudden you're not presented like, hey, you need to do this by your head of school or by some, state authority or something. It's just like, wow, this is interesting. Does this work? It starts to get exciting, at least for
that
me. And it
that
sounds like for you as well.
that's why yeah, that's why when you asked about is it the system or the teachers, I think it's more often the system, because I think teachers are smart, and they know what good teaching is if they saw it. I think,
Mm-hmm.
they'd see that. Honestly, I think I just thought of this. How about, if Montessori is like follow the child? I bet if you just had a group of smart teachers who wanted to do well, and let them figure out, hey, how do we teach kids best? They might come to something that's close to Montessori, something that's
Mhm.
closer than what we're trying to do here, fit inside this
Yeah.
system. You always see those. Several of my coworkers have this at the end of their emails. They have that quote. I don't know what this quote is from, but they'll always be like, uh, it'll say like, "Tell me and I'll forget it, show me and I'll
Oh yeah.
remember it, involve me, I'll understand it." And
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, that's such a nice quote." But now I'm like, "Oh, that's pretty Montessori right there."
Yeah.
Involve me and I'll understand. But it's you know, I don't know.
I don't know if that's
That's what they're always
Benjamin.
striving for, but we're not
I
quite
think
getting it.
yeah, and I don't know if that's Benjamin Franklin or Einstein. There's a few different people I find getting attached with that in some form or another.
People probably just attaching random names to it. I'm
Yeah,
sure on the internet anyway.
but I'm telling you, like I feel, Andrew, you're right to some extent. At least, like I feel in my personal experience, I didn't do public school conventional. I was more in a traditional school, private school, and we
Okay.
we had a lot of leeway to kind of come up with things. And
Uh,
I think we came up with a lot of amazing things, but it really wasn't until I dove deep into Montessori into her books and then saw that there was a Montessori classroom down the hall where that's where the
uh,
real fundamental ideas started to affect me
yeah.
and some of my colleagues. So I think, although I think you're completely right, if you put thoughtful people who care about children into a room, they're going to come up with better ideas than what quote the system is just telling them they have to do. But Montessori, Maria Montessori, this was perfected over decades,
Yeah. I'm
so
not
it's
trying to
like,
short. I'm not trying
yeah,
to
yeah, no, I'm
shortchange
with
her
it.
work.
I'm like, don't diss Montessori, man.
No, I'm not. No, 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 no. We could never attain that genius, right? No, of course.
Yeah.
No, but
Um,
I'm just saying that it's so many constraints about like, okay, well, you need to like legally, I have to teach so many minutes of math a day,
yeah.
and it has to be so many minutes of social studies and so many minutes of reading or whatever it is. And it's like, and legally also, you have to learn about it's fourth grade, you have to learn about this, this, and this, and this. And if the kids are interested in X, but that's a fifth grade thing, nope, can't touch it.
I
Like you're
know
not,
it's
it's like
see
it's
that.
frustrating. It's very
Yeah, and that's
frustrating.
what I think the only time I get angry, because I rarely get angry these days, but that kind of thing angers me. And I think it
Mm,
and Andrew, you probably don't know this, but it does spill over into Montessori because Montessori is
mm,
obviously we're working with children. And so the state or the whatever state government, it's usually states, not federal laws, usually
no.
with youngest children. They come and tell you what's needed. So in some Montessori schools, they can't mix, the 5 year olds, third years, with say a 2 year old or a 3 year old or 4 year old because that's not allowed. That could be dangerous. So they
You mean
bring,
physically the kids cannot be in the same classroom?
yeah, yeah. So it depends on what
What?
state you're in. So sometimes I'll
Wow.
go to Montessori schools and, I'll speak there and then they're like, oh, well, we separate out the kindergarten year.
Uh-huh.
So it's, you have 3 and 4 year olds in one classroom and then the 5 year olds. And then if there's any 6 year olds in another classroom, and that's not
Mhm.
Montessori, but what can they do? Because the state says you can't mix those kids. And the reason they're saying that is because they have their views on what's safety and so forth. But, and as you said, Andrew, like there's definitely specific things you need to teach this in,
Yeah.
public schools. And to me, it really irks me because as you said, like you've got a child who's advanced and maybe quote advanced and maybe could really be doing something really remarkable and enjoyable, but they're held back.
Right.
Or again, in the self-esteem issue that you raised early on, they're forced to move forward and they're just not ready for it.
Right.
And
I
it's
yeah, I've
it's
heard of a lot of kid like my again the same coworker actually we were talking the other day and her son is in high school and she said yeah he used to love to read and then he like this kid who's like 15 he literally said to her the other day yeah I don't like to read anymore because they made me read a bunch of books that I hated at school so I kind of lost interest in reading it's like because they
yeah,
have to teach whatever
yeah,
Chaucer or whatever so they didn't have to
yep. No, and I mean, I was just at a conference over the weekend, and this lady, she's in her 90s, wonderful lady out here, McGee in Florida, South Florida, but she's been in Montessori forever. But she told this story where a child had left Montessori to go to traditional, a public school, because the parents brought them out. I don't know how old she was, but she was older. She wasn't super young. And she had said that she was telling her parents, and she says, in my old school, when we got there in the morning, we made choices. Like we went in, I'd figure out what do I want to do today. And at my new school, the teacher makes the choices for us. And I was like,
Wow.
oh,
The
I mean, she was,
self-awareness on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
she was self-aware to understand that, but she wasn't at a level to judge it. Like me, I'm like, oh
Right.
man, she
Yeah.
just, what, that's not
She's
her
just saying,
developmental stage. She was just stating a fact.
wow.
And it's
Hmm.
just, and that's the case. And I mean, to the extent that I'm sure, Andrew, you're trying to integrate or implement, actually, I should just ask you, like, are you trying to bring some of these Montessori ideas, like some choice, into your classrooms? And is that working? Can you do it? Or is it just like, you're like, I need to get out of here. This is not going to work. Like, how do you feel about it all? And what are you attempting to do?
Uh, a little bit of both, I guess. I definitely was doing before even learning about Montessori. I feel like I was trying to do a lot of those choice things. I can remember one year I was teaching the fourth graders would switch classes for math specifically based on like their level. So you'd have like a whole classroom full of like I was teaching the advanced math that year.
Mhm.
And that year I really did pretty well with it because I would do small groups and I designed lots of different choice activities for the kids to do. And looking back on it, I was like, man, that was a great year. And that year I even got into, I was testing them at different times, like when they were ready. When your group is ready,
Mm,
I'll give you the test up here, and then maybe your group won't get the test till next week or something like that, or whenever it is.
mhm.
So I was like really proud of myself then. But now looking back on it, I realized that worked because those kids were in the high math group. And so that was a group full of kids who liked math because they were good at it,
Mhm.
who had gotten good grades in it in the previous years. So they were focused on whatever they were doing with math because they really liked it. When you try and do that with kind of your general ed classroom, you have a lot of kids who they're not used to that. They're not used to making choices like that. So half the time their choice will be, I'm just going to fool around with whatever this material is. And
Yeah.
you don't have time to really because you're not starting with them when they're 3 years old, so you don't
Yeah.
really have time to go into like the whole procedure with how to treat this material and all the like. I'm amazed by the amount of time that these Montessori teachers spend with like the detail that I see my kids teachers doing of like, this is how we hold this particular thing and this is where this
Yeah.
bead goes and all this stuff is like very like detailed. I'm like, wow, how do you have time for this? But it seems like it really pays off because it's a much more calm environment. But in terms of like this year, because I've been off the past. I just came back to work after being off for 2 years with child rearing leave with my youngest son when he was born. And coming back, I was like, okay, this is the Montessori year. I'm doing it. I'm turning this classroom into a Montessori classroom. Well, that just fell right off because I'm kind of busy at home. So like I said, I don't have time to really come up with all these things in class.
Mhm.
But also it's just hard. It's just a lot to manage for kids who are not used to it. I have implemented a few things. Actually, I want to thank you. I started doing a Let Grow project this year,
Oh, with
which
Lenore Skenazy?
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is I don't know if people listening don't remember, but it's like although I guess you could do it lots of different ways, but the way that I do it is I just assign it like monthly and say, and I told the parents and that kids can at home they do something that they've never done before, like do the dishes or like
Mhm.
go for a walk with the dog around the block by yourself, or like call up and order a pizza yourself on the phone as a 9-year old, um and that has gotten a huge response. Like the parents are like loving that and the kids are loving it too.
Oh,
Like
I can imagine.
I could last month I had a girl run into the classroom and she was like, guess what, my mom gave me whatever it was, $30, and we went to the grocery store. She let me walk around and I got all the stuff that I wanted in the basket to make dinner that night, and she like had to budget out like
Oh,
what she wanted to do. And
I love it.
she came back and she was like so proud of herself. So like that's going really well, but like in terms
Yeah.
of it in the classroom stuff, it's just really hard to manage,
But
but
that's
I can.
it's wild that the one thing that's going really well is that, like, you're helping them to integrate what they're learning and what they're doing at home. So it's like
Sure.
this integration with their whole life. And I think
Yeah.
Montessori is like, this is learning for life, for your life, whether
Hmm.
you're 4 years old or 25 years old. The learning that you're doing, it should be helping your life. It shouldn't
Hmm.
just be we turn it off, when we leave school and then we go back into our new or home life.
Right.
And I did the same thing, Andrew. I would do when we were studying history, I'd do like the church search when we were studying the Reformation. So it'd be like, hey, why don't you look around at the names of the churches? This was in like seventh graders, so the older kids. And
Okay.
man, they were on fire because all of a sudden they're looking around, and go, oh my gosh, there's so many churches around me because they weren't paying as much attention, But I think we can do those little tidbit things as
Yeah.
traditional school teachers, but in Montessori, like literally the practical life activities, that's so that when the kids get home, like with your son doing the zipper, it's like so he can zip up his pants on his own,
Yeah.
or
Sure.
so an older child that's maybe growing some, I don't know, some vegetables at school, that's so that he can go home, maybe grow some vegetables at home, cook it for the family and that type of thing. So um it's such a different approach to what learning is about. Like it's real versus, hey, I need to do this to get it for the test. Because I don't know if fourth graders yet in your school with you are asking, well, is this going to be on the test?
Oh,
They go,
sure.
oh, you get that in fourth grade.
Is this graded? Yeah. Is this gonna be
Yeah.
graded? Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah. You definitely hear that a lot.
Yeah.
I guess you also brought something else to mind. I've been trying more this year to like reach out to parents and like um whatever we're learning about, especially in science and social studies, it seems like it comes up a lot. Like we have a whole unit on the American Revolution and the Constitution. I live just across the river from Philadelphia, which is where all that stuff happened. But we're only allowed one field trip. Well, actually, this year we're not allowed any field trips since COVID. So, but usually it's with one field trip a year. But I'll send emails and be like, "Hey, we're learning about this, and it's a great day trip right over the bridge to Philly, and you can
Yeah.
go into the Independence Hall and see all this stuff." Um, there's all kinds of neat little things you can do to try and get like, because I can see the kids are interested, but we're on such a time crunch that's like, okay, well,
Yes.
we we learned about Ben Franklin or whatever it is, and kids might be interested, ask questions. It was like, well, go look it up on your own time
Yeah.
because
We
we
got
got
to
to move
move
on.
on.
We
Gosh,
can't, we don't have time to dive deep on this, which I
Andrew, I
wish
just
we did.
feel, I feel like, man, it's just, it's so wild talking to you. And that's why I'm happy I had you on because there's got to be thousands, hundreds of thousands of other teachers out there feeling just like us because man, I remember parents would come up to me and go, hey, so, Jesse or Mr. McCarthy back then, who knows what they were talking. They'd say, we're thinking of taking a family trip for like 2 weeks, but it's not during Christmas or the summer. It's during this break. And I'm like, oh my God, no, because their kid's going to fall behind. Right. And then
Yeah, yeah,
when they come back, what are we going to do? And now the idea of like, say a family having the ability to take a trip to, to Europe or something, or to Africa,
sure.
it's like, oh my God, get out of here, do it
Yeah, do
whenever,
it.
because
Yeah,
it's the experience. But as you're saying, and just so that, Montessorians out there, and if you're in traditional school, you have stuff that needs to get done.
yeah,
You as a teacher, you're rating on, are they accomplishing our goals for the year? And are they meeting these standards? Then they're going to have to take a test. So if the child goes on a 2-week break, what's going to happen? We can't have that. So I just so empathize with you, and I can't believe you're still in it. Like I'm just like, oh no, oh man,
yeah. It's tough. I had this is just bringing up all kinds of stories. Also, this year we had the kids like wait. It's like a dumb game at the end of the day, like waiting for the buses to be called. They're playing penny hockey, which I showed them how to play. I don't know if you ever played this. You just get some pennies and you try and like flick them across the table in a certain
until they
order and
fall
score a goal.
off.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
certain score goal in the end. But anyway, during class, it was probably a couple months ago, one of the kids found a penny on the floor. Oh, here it is. I found a penny, and as they're giving it to me, they say, "Oh, wait, whoa, this is 2012. This is before I was born. Is that when the penny was made?" And they got real interested, and all the kids started looking at.
Ah,
They started looking at all the pennies. Whoa, this one's older than my dad, and all this stuff. And then
yes.
there's one that's like, oh, this one has a D on it. We looked it up. Oh, that was made in Denver, and then we found out that actually the mint where they make all this stuff is in Philadelphia. We could have taken a trip right across. It's right there. You go and tour where they make the money and stuff like that. They got so into it. Um,
Man, love
and
it.
and I because I'm a little bit more aware of Montessori now. I just took that time and I was like, yeah, let's look into it. Let's research it. Go look that up on the
Oh,
computer. Let's figure it
wonderful.
out. But if an administrator had walked into the room right there, it would have been like, what are you doing? It's supposed to be reading time right now.
Yes.
Everybody's looking at pennies. Like, what are we doing here? But
Yeah, and I
I didn't
think
want to squash that curiosity. You know what I'm saying?
I love it, Andrew. And I know you're in an environment where, it's what can you do? You got to balance these things. But just to, give you some insight with Montessori there, we allow that type of following the child, like, oh, I'm interested in it. Because of course, that's the time when they're going to want to learn so much, they're going to soak it up. But I know there's a lot of people outside, they're going to be like, well, how could you just have them follow whatever they want to do all day long? Like that seems kind of chaotic too, right? And I want to just make it very clear that's not Montessori. So that
Right.
would be more of modern progressive schooling that's just like let the child do whatever they want. And that's not Montessori. So, but I think what Andrew, the challenge on your end and the challenge on my end back then is that you don't have a whole set of classroom materials that you can go to on the daily. And then if a child pops out one day and says, oh my gosh, like, I saw there's a spider. Oh my gosh. And you want to research that. You can do that because the next day you can draw him into something related to spiders in some of the materials that we already have.
Sure.
Whereas you, Andrew, you got 2 kids, you're up all night. How am I going to integrate this tomorrow? Because these kids, that's impossible.
Yes.
It's an impossible balance,
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, it's just, you just feel such a pressure to just like keep moving on. Like we don't have time for that. Just sit down because we're not doing that right now. Go look it up at home.
It is a strange. One way we dealt with it, or at least one of the science teachers that I was a colleague of mine. His name was Doug Peltz. He actually does mystery science. Really, really great guy. Very thoughtful. But there would be a wall in his science classroom that was basically like, why questions or ask me anything type questions, because the kids would have these questions and it was just like, throw it up on the wall. So I think this was more of a Montessori influence. And it was like, at first it was the teacher can answer that question. Then it became, well, if there's another student in the school that knows the answer, go up to that child and you could tell them, so it's just so we can implement these type of things in quote traditional conventional schools. But at the end of the day, we're just playing around. Like we're skirting around the fact that the system is wrong. Let's get out of it and then integrate all this into a system, into one that works.
Yes. It just seems so much more efficient than what we're trying to do in public school right now. Montessori, it just seems more efficient, even though on the surface you're like, well, I see some kid wandering around in the classroom, like, but I don't know, somehow it must be more efficient because they're learning in Montessori classes.
I see. So what you're saying is that the traditional system seems more efficient than the Montessori classroom would be.
If you were just to go observe, go observe one versus the other, it's like, oh well, these kids are learning in public school. They're all sitting there quiet and they're absorbing whatever the teacher's saying or whatever. Whereas Montessori, you got kids, some kids who seem like they're really into it, some kids who seem like they might be wandering around a little bit more, or or a kid spends an entire week like looking at a map and doing drawing the map or the puzzle or whatever it might be, and it's like, well, how are you wasting an entire week on that? But it doesn't. I guess it's not a waste. I guess.
I think, and Maria Montessori talks about this. I think we have a traditional view that if the child is like got his head down in some papers and he's almost bored and he's doing work, that he's doing work. Sure. Whereas, in Montessori, the view is the child engaged in some activity that's purposeful? And it doesn't, it doesn't have to look exactly like what we think of filling in bubble tests as doing work or worksheets. So I can see what you're saying, that if you go into a Montessori classroom, you see a child kind of wandering around. It's like, but to me, I think of it as like, imagine us as adults, what's a 30-minute wander? Like, I need to take a walk. What does that do for you when you come back?
Sure.
You're just refreshed. Or a nap. I know some people take naps and it's like, if without their nap, imagine a teacher that, oh no, there's no napping in here. We're working. We got to be efficient. Efficient for what? Like, so that we can get good grades on the test with it, so we can live life to the fullest. But I can totally see what you're saying. I think there's a lot that goes into that, but in one way, people like to think that Montessori, the teachers don't matter. It's just the materials or so forth. And the teacher fades to the background. And in a way, she or he does, but they're still so powerful, because if a child happens to be wandering 2 days in a row or something, how do you redirect that child? That's a skill. That's a real skill. And as you just said with the penny, I can tell you, Andrew, there's teachers in Montessori that wouldn't jump on that because they just wouldn't know. They're not, in tune with children to that extent. So it's not just the method. You have to have that connection with children. But just as you said with the penny, if that happened in a good Montessori classroom, let's dive into this. And then again, you go integrated into, but how many pennies are in $1? Because then there's your math,
sure.
or, who is that, Lincoln? and
Yeah.
then, oh, who's Lincoln? And then you
Yeah.
go off there, and then you go back to the core stuff, the core history, the core math.
Sure.
But again, there's a lot to it, but I think you're completely right to see that kind of seemingly inefficiency, because I had the same feeling when I started looking at Montessori in the beginning. So,
Mhm.
I mean, is there anything now? I'm curious now. Is there anything else that you see in Montessori where you're like, I don't know about this?
um good question. I've definitely, it seems like I've had that experience over the past few years learning about Montessori. Like every time I'm like, well, what about this? Uh, like initially I remember, well, it sounds nice, but the kids are probably nuts with all these choices that they can, there's probably chaos in there. And then I remember I went to like visit the school before my son went to this preschool. I'm looking at like 3-year-olds nicely carrying around this giant map puzzle and setting it down together, and like so quiet and everybody's like focused. I'm like, are these animatronics here? Are you punking me? What is going on with these kids?
Yeah,
But it was like amazing. I was like, okay, I guess not. Um, I would think like, well, okay, this is good, but this was made so long. Some of these activities are kind of outdated, like the like polishing the silver or whatever they're,
yeah,
polishing a little thing. I'm like, well, that's not really practical for today. But then I
yeah.
remember going to back to school night at my son's school, and the teacher, it was like amazing. She's so good. She was showing how one material led to the next, and like
Mm-hmm.
this is strengthening the pincer
Pincer grip.
grip of the child,
Mm,
and it's like I'm like, wow, you're Mr. Miyagiing these kids into like writing, it's like doing chores, and then you all of a sudden you
yeah.
know how to do all this other stuff. It's like amazing. Um, I One thing that very recently actually just got, I went to, because we're looking into potentially sending our kids to uh well, I think we definitely are going to send our kids to elementary Montessori school, which there aren't too
Mhm.
many choices around here. But I went
Yep.
and toured one just last week, and I was thinking about like today's world, like computer literacy and things like that, because they didn't have computers when Maria
Mm-hmm.
Montessori was doing this stuff, and thinking, not that I want my kid looking at a screen all the time, but it is an
Mm-hmm.
important part of today's world. If you grow up, and they did have one computer there in their classroom, and I was asking her, "Oh, what's the deal with that?" And she says, yeah, they learned to type. They were teaching the kids like the home row and stuff like that. I thought that was good. And the older kids will use it for research. And I'm thinking, wow, you're just letting them just go nuts on the internet researching. That might be kind
Mm-hmm.
of dangerous. But she said, oh, and the teacher does a great lesson on finding reliable sources. And what they do is they go and they write something crazy on a Wikipedia article, and they see how long it'll last up there before anybody takes it down. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so, because you're involving the kids and showing them that like you got to be careful about your sources online. So I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like some Montessori, maybe if you're like really strict Montessori, like, no, Maria Montessori didn't use computers, so you can't use a
Yeah.
computer in it. But it seems like some Montessori schools are at least integrating some newer
Yeah.
things into their
So,
classroom. I don't know.
I mean, I love the question, and I think it's all this is so challenging because Maria Montessori is so long gone. Maria Montessori
Yeah,
herself, like
sure.
she's been dead for a half century plus. So the issue is that you have people that are following Maria Montessori. She said follow the child, but people tend to follow, the guru or the leader, right?
Yeah.
So I think we need to be able to adapt. Her whole thing was adapt. So if computers are in use and you're never showing a child a computer until they're 14 years old, you're going to real disadvantage for a
Yeah,
child.
sure.
But the Montessori philosophy at a very young age is that you want to learn about the world first. So
Hmm.
anything we're doing on a computer is really just a recreation or help of reality. So if
Hmm.
the child is getting computer at 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, they haven't really interacted with reality. Well, what about trees? What about birds? What about
Sure.
grass outside? So most Montessorians and Maria Montessori would say you keep reality until about age 6. And then
Mm.
after that, you start to build on that. And I think computers might be integrated in that way. Now, but in terms of what the teacher told you about research, that's really her own creation because
Yeah,
there's not a lot, as you said, Maria Montessori wasn't alive. Now there's people that have advanced, hey, this is what Maria Montessori would have done or
would
something
have
like that.
done. Yeah,
But I take that as, hey, show me the evidence. And if it seems like it's good, then maybe we can roll with it. But we can't technically say that's from Maria Montessori.
sure.
Um, but I think if you're adapting to the world around you and children need to be able to do research and not in some archaic local
Right.
library that has 10 books total. I mean, that's kind of
Right.
silly. So I'm with you, but I think you're going to find a lot of variation when you
Hmm.
visit Montessori schools. And I have over the years, just hundreds and hundreds of schools. And older the children get, the more variation you're going to see.
I see. Yeah. And that is that was at the elementary school, because at the preschool where they're at right now, there aren't really any computers or anything like that. So I think maybe occasionally they might show like a video if they need to or something like that, but it's
Yeah.
which I appreciate. So I guess
And
my
what
only oh, go ahead.
just real quick on the computers, what I do get a lot of is like, oh, well, this public school district is so wealthy, so they have all the top gear and all that. And then people are complaining like it's just horrific that this inner city place doesn't have all these high-tech computers. And I'm just in the background going, my God, thank goodness they don't have all that high-tech crap. Like I understand the idea behind it, that there's something wrong if we have a public school system where one school gets all this
Yeah.
amazing and then the other school gets basically nothing. That's doesn't make any sense. But just we don't want to be on that framework that's the kind of the more modern, like, oh, high tech, nice buildings equates to good education, because it
Right.
doesn't.
Right.
So that's just a
Well,
side note, but
yeah, that whole thing with computers, that is funny that you bring that up, because you'll hear that a lot about, well, this school has so many. We got laptop little Chromebooks for all of our students several years ago, and it was such a
mhm,
big deal, and everybody was making a big deal out of it, and I got swept up in it too, like, this is great. But now I'm
yeah,
thinking, like, you know okay, that's nice, but does it actually help a kid learn better?
yeah,
Maybe if you use it the right way, but maybe not. Maybe actually it's a huge distraction if you're not using it the right way.
yeah. So yeah, and I'm
So
not I'm not throwing out there those, listen, believe me, it's bad, but the idea is that we should not just be like, oh, shiny things means better.
right. Right.
So Andrew, is there anything that like you're thinking in you're in conventional school, you're thinking about Montessori, you don't know exactly where you're at in terms of where you're going to go with it, or maybe you already do. You can let me know. But is there something that you would give, guidance to parents kind of in your situation if they're thinking about their child's in traditional school, or even other teachers out there in your position, does anything come up?
um I guess just to learn about it more, like I did. I definitely in the beginning just kind of blew it off as like, oh yeah, that's fancy preschool. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not, but be curious about it and actually read about it, or go, I don't know, look at a school, actually look, even pretend, say, oh yeah, I want to send my kid here, even if you're not really thinking about it. Just go and look at it and see what it's like, because it's really eye opening, I think. And yeah, I guess just kind of like what I'm doing with the parents of my students this year. If you're not, because I know a lot of parents out there would not want to, if your kid is like solidly in public school right now and you're not ready to make that jump, or you don't, if there's no good schools around you, I guess I think you've said this probably a lot on your podcast, is just try and get more into that Montessori mindset, rather than
Mhm.
you don't necessarily need the school. Just expose your kid to a lot of different things. Try and figure out what their interests are, and really give them lots of opportunities to explore that more deeply and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
rather than just doing whatever the teacher says. It's like
Yeah.
um, you know give them lots of outside experiences, because the school's not going to give it to them. You at least could do it at home.
Yeah.
um, and I'll also say, for I guess Montessori people who are listening, because I struggle with this a lot, is to not be too pretentious about it, I guess. And I don't
Mm,
have a kind of way to say that, is because I think a lot of teachers and parents get turned off when you start to act like superior, like you know the answer, like, well, this could
yeah.
all be solved if you just did this Montessori way or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the way with a lot of things in life, especially with this, and when it involves their kids, it kind of brings across a message of like, oh, am I doing something wrong with my kid?
Yeah.
Nobody likes to feel like that. So I think just bringing up, kind of like I did the other day at lunch, where it's just like, well, isn't it kind of silly that we teach them at different levels, and then we test them all at the same time, and that, just without even mentioning the name Montessori, and kind of sowing those seeds of
Yeah.
that kind of thing, just pointing out the flaws without sounding like you know it all, I guess. I don't know if
Yeah.
that
And
makes
without
sense.
sounding like you, parent, you're a big mess and you're messing your child up.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. And Andrew, I appreciate that, because I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to connect with you when you reached out to me, is because you wrote so calmly, concisely, and you were just kind of getting out your feelings, but also, in a way that was, hey, can I ask you some questions? But it was just very honest and open, and not like I don't know, there's not this heavy judgment of self, like, oh my God, I'm a big mess, or Montessori thinks they're everything. It's just this, hey, I'm curious about this. Can we chat about it? And I think
Yeah.
that mentality is very, very helpful. And I'll even take it as feedback, because it's like it's tough to balance, as we're saying that, this is right. Like I mean, I've done the work to know this is good, and I want people to see that. But also, if somebody's not asking me for my opinion, I shouldn't be in their face.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's in the world we're seeing that a lot in America. Everybody needs to shout their opinion at the other person. It's like, did I ask?
Unsolicited advice. Yeah.
Yeah, unsolicited. Yeah, do not give unsolicited advice. Um, so I think that's great for the Montessori community. And if you're out there listening, Montessorians,
Yes.
take heed to what Andrew is saying. And anything else?
Uh, no, I just want to say thanks for having me on, and I really love this podcast. I know you probably don't want me to say this, but this listening to this podcast really has changed my life. I'm being serious because it's kind of I got really into Montessori. I was like, wow, this Montessori thing's really interesting, and then I looked for podcasts about it, because that's how I learn about things nowadays, listening to podcasts about them in the car. And I found your podcast, and it's really made me have to kind of make a lot of tough decisions about, well, I'm going to send my kids to a whole, like, I never ever thought that I would send my kids. I enjoyed my time in public school. I'm a public school teacher. I always thought that I would send my kids to the school that's right there, that we could walk to right down the street. But I'm probably not going to do that now. And I even may got to work out some logistics, but I even may change careers now, become a Montessori teacher myself because of this podcast. So I want to thank you, Jesse.
Wow, man, Andrew, thank you. It really hits me, man. I appreciate you saying that. And I'm happy, because one of the reasons I did this was like, I experienced it myself, and to see somebody, I think basically in my shoes, like doing the same thing. I mean, my own son now, he's 11, he's going to be 11 months. I'm jumping a month. He's about to be 10 months old. He's sleeping in the next room. I wanted to do the episode with you so much. I'm like, I'm in my bedroom right now. That's not the normal thing for me, just recording this. Cause I think, I don't know, I really connected with you. So I appreciate those words. And, thank you for coming on and risking some, I don't know. We only got Andrew here, the first name. So thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on. And again, I appreciate your words, and thanks everyone for listening in.
Thanks, Jesse.